Hi, this is Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and this video is about 5 damaging narcissistic narratives that we need to release if we want to regain our happiness and self-esteem. I am really sorry because I realized that I've actually haven't made a video in several months, and that's because I've had certain important personal things to attend to. And this week I'm on a marathon. I'm actually going to try and make at least 4 videos. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm flagging it off with this video after a long break. And the reason I wanted to create this video is because most of the channels about narcissism focus a lot on narcissism in personal relationships, and of course that's very important because that is where we are most affected by narcissism in the realm of personal relationships. But I also wanted to focus a little bit on narcissism in society and how there are certain social narratives that are driven by narcissistic values, and whether we are narcissists or not, we as a society tend to subscribe to these narratives, and they are very damaging to us. So this is what I wanted to address in the video today. So I'd like to make a discernment to begin with between NPD, which is narcissistic personality disorder, and narcissism as I refer to it in this video. NPD is a pathological disorder. It comes under the category of psychopathological disorders, and it's classified in the DSM as a cluster B personality disorder. But the narcissism that I am referring to doesn't necessarily come always from narcissists. It is something that is there in our social structures. It's let me use the word narcissistic values. And even though you may have people who don't have NPD who may still believe in these narratives and use these narratives, and interestingly it can be as damaging to the receiver as someone who has been affected by being around a cluster B, an NPD. Now, the word narrative is usually in reference to, the word narrative actually means some kind of a story. I'm going to use it in a slightly different context here. So to quote the Cambridge Dictionary, a narrative is a particular way of explaining or understanding events. And I am going to talk about 5, sorry, my nose is very tickly for some strange reason today. I'm going to talk about 5 very narcissistic narratives that are very prevalent in society today and are very damaging to our self-esteem, to our sense of self-worth, and often even the best meaning people use these unconsciously. So we're going to start off with the first narrative, and this is a narrative around what is known popularly as victim mentality or victim consciousness. Now, in a nutshell, victim mentality or victim consciousness would be defined as an idea that when bad things happen to us, which inevitably do to all of us at some stage in our lives, somewhere in our subconscious or even in our conscious behavior, we have a certain mindset or a certain consciousness that brought on those negative events. And this kind of mindset or this kind of consciousness is popularly known as a victim mentality. Now, the victim mentality or the victim consciousness narrative is based on certain assumptions, and they are that we have 100% control over everything that happens to us, because if something bad happened to you, consciously or unconsciously, you have 100% control over that. That is the assumption of this narrative. And therefore, overtly or covertly, you bought it on yourself. It's also based on the idea that willpower is the ultimate power, and that willpower can overcome anything. So again, if something bad happened to you, or maybe you are addicted to certain things, or you have bad habits, the only person who's responsible for bringing that into your life is you, because you either have a strong willpower that you're using to overcome this, or you don't. And if you're not overcoming it, something is wrong with you. You're weak-willed. So this is the other assumption. The other assumption is that the known is larger than the unknown. So the idea of the victim consciousness or the victim mentality is based in the assumption that we always know everything, that we have a 360-degree view of everything. Now, I'm not going to deny that there are some elements of truth to this narrative. So, are we responsible for our own lives? In many ways, yes. Do we sometimes bring things upon ourselves? Yes, we do. However, the assumptions that I just talked about are very, very rigid, and they're very sort of used in a very blanket-like fashion. And I would just like to dispel some of these assumptions, because they are responsible for doing a lot of damage to people who have been genuinely victimized. And the first assumption that I'd like to take apart is the assumption that we have 100% control over everything, either consciously or unconsciously. We really don't, right? Now, I know that the idea that we have 100% control is a very empowering idea. The idea may have come from a well-meaning space. I think it's got mixed with well-meaning with a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't so well-meaning. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of what drives us, or what motivates us to act in certain ways, or a lot of what attraction is all about, is not always in our conscious control, and sometimes not even in our unconscious control. Because it brings me to the other assumption, and that is that the known is bigger than the unknown. It's the other way around. The unknown is bigger than the known. We don't always know what we need to know to avoid negativity or disaster or problems. We don't always know. Even when we think we know, we don't really know, because there's always something called an X factor. There's always an X factor which you have to account for, and you say like, okay, I'm gonna put in my best effort, I'm gonna do what I can, but there may be so many aspects of this issue that I don't really understand, and therefore I cannot control. Okay, I'm being very clear. This video is in no way a message to feel disempowered. That, so it's not like it's an absolute. So it's not like I don't have 100% control. It means I have no control. You do, but the unknown is larger than the unknown. And I think the more we make friends with the unknown, the more we get to know the unknown, the more empowered we can be. But that is a process, and it can be a lifelong process, or a several life process if you believe in past lives and that kind of thing. So you're not always to blame. You still have to take responsibility to solve your own issues, even if those issues aren't always your fault. So if you have a terrible accident, or you get attacked, or lose your job, you may not have contributed to it, through the so-called victim mentality, but you still have to solve it. And that is where the responsibility comes in. And I've talked about this in another video of mine, which I'm going to paste down in the link below, called "Is Self-Responsibility Truly Empowering?" But the idea that there is something called a victim mentality because somewhere we are bringing things on ourselves is actually a very, very damaging narrative. And it is damaging because people with genuine issues have been dismissed, have been put aside, their issues have been minimized due to this very, very narcissistic narrative. And why do I call it a narcissistic narrative? Because narcissism as a concept, as an essence, is so much about image and so much about perfectionism, and it's not a very flexible ideology, right? So then everything has to fit into these neat holes, yeah, neat square, whatever, you know what I'm saying. And if it doesn't, then you automatically just assume somebody is playing the victim when actually they may have a genuine issue. And nowhere has this been more marked than in the area of trauma. So it's very interesting because I specialize in trauma and I suffer from complex PTSD myself. And when before PTSD was first even recognized by the world of psychology, it was first seen in soldiers. And this is an example of how this victim mentality narrative is so damaging. And there were soldiers who had PTSD actually, but very little was known about it at that point of time, and they were actually dismissed as cowards. They were told they were cowards. Imagine risking your life, working hard in service, possibly getting injured or watching someone you love die in front of you, and having this terrible, terrible PTSD from it, and then being told that you're a coward and you're playing the victim. Just imagine that. And you don't have to be a soldier to have that experience. I have, as a CPTSD sufferer myself, I have had many times when I'm actually having a symptom of trauma be interpreted as me playing the victim. I remember I had this crazy experience a couple of years ago where I had this very narcissistic, and she was an NPD in my observation, not that I diagnosed her, but she was this supervisor who was sent to train me when I first became a trainer a couple of years ago. She was supposed to do my train the trainer program, and she completely attacked my self-worth and my self-esteem to the point that I started having panic attacks, and actually had a panic attack in the middle of the session where I was supposed to be tested for my train the trainer to see what I had learned. And I was actually having a panic attack, and she stopped me in the middle because of course I was a disaster in the middle of a panic attack trying to conduct a training program. And she actually tore me apart and said that I was playing the victim, and that I was lazy, and that I hadn't done my work, and I hadn't, the reason I was performing so badly is because I didn't take my duty seriously. I was having a goddamn fucking panic attack, you know. And there have been many instances like this, and I'm sure those of you who are watching this can relate to what I'm saying. So we have to, as a society, move away, because this is not just NPD people who will say this to you. They will say it to you for sure when you're actually having a crisis. But it's society as a whole. It was like, oh, that person is just, it's a victim consciousness, a victim mentality, and it's so damaging. And it actually does the opposite of empower you. So if you have been hurt by this, or you have been damaged by this, know that it is based on very faulty assumptions that are half-truths. There are some truths to what these assumptions are, but they're half-truths. They're not very logical, that they are not based on a deep understanding of many things that could cause problems in our lives. The second narrative that is very, very prominent in our society is the laziness narrative. And this narrative says that if you are unsuccessful or you are poor, this is used a lot on people who are poor and who for whatever reasons have not been able to move ahead with their lives, is that you are lazy. You must There must be the reason, because you're lazy, you're procrastinator, you're self-sabotager. And it is based on the assumption that you are your own worst enemy, and if you're not able to get something done, then you just must not have tried enough, and that anything that you say in your defense uh, is you just being defensive and you being full of excuses. Okay, here is the thing. I know that there are hundreds of videos, articles, books on how to be successful, and there is this idea going around that if you just follow a certain formula, if you go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, etc., and you do just those things right and you work hard enough, there is no way you cannot be successful. And I'm here to tell you that is the biggest load of BS that I have ever heard in my life, because life does not fit into neat little boxes. There may be many reasons something isn't happening in your life, and the reasons aren't always there in all the books and all the videos, and you know, there's so much that, again, it's coming back to what I was saying about this idea that the known is bigger than the unknown. No, the unknown is bigger than the known, and there are many reasons why you may not have been successful, or you haven't been able to make the money that you want. And it sometimes may be laziness. Yeah, sometimes there are people who are freeloaders and who don't get up, and I'm not talking about that. So as I said, these assumptions are not entirely false, but they are half truths, because a lot of the time it isn't laziness, it isn't procrastination. I know lots of people who work really hard and who try really hard and still aren't successful for reasons, and they come to me for some of these people are clients. They come to me, and sometimes we have a challenge trying to figure out why, and sometimes we're able to figure it out, and sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. And it isn't always, the answer isn't always what is there out there in the literature on success. I, as a shamanic healer, can tell you that sometimes there's some very crazy reasons why you're not succeeding, and they have nothing to do with what's in the books. And they have nothing to do with you being lazy or procrastinating. I remember this incident, a small incident that happened that really irked me. A couple of years ago, I was sitting with a group of people, and they were all Westerners, and I was the only Indian there. And I remember one Westerner who very sort of judgmentally and angrily said that you Indians are so lazy. And I was like, wow, okay, why do you say we're lazy? And he said that because he said, well, you know, he does sports. He would trek up this hill every day as exercise. And he was like, I never see you Indians doing that. He had automatically assumed that the reason Indians don't trek up, or he doesn't see these Indians doing the same sport that he does, is because they're lazy. The truth is, the hill that he treks up, that he was trekking up, was near a holiday resort, and most of the resort was frequented predominantly by Westerners, and the people who were working in the resorts were Indians, poor Indians, who work 12 to 14 hours a day on less than minimum wage that they would in many parts of the Western world. How's that for lazy? But he automatically, in his head, he had automatically assumed that they're lazy, but he hadn't actually stopped to consider why they weren't actually there doing this kind of stuff, because you need to have leisure time and money to do that kind of stuff. It doesn't make you lazy. You know, and believe me, I have spent a lot of time with people who are poor, and most of them work far harder than anybody else, than any middle class person, than any upper class person. The third narrative that I would like to talk about is the hatred and anger narrative. And this narrative is very interesting because it has very austere rules about who is allowed to get angry and what anger means. And the idea of this is very, very clear. It says that you're only allowed to get angry if you are coming from a certain privilege, and usually that is the person the people who are legitimately allowed to get angry ever in this narrative is white male privilege. If you're a woman and you get angry, you're immediately branded as someone who is either hysterical or is experiencing hatred. So there's you're angry, it goes straight to hysteria and hatred, even when it isn't. If you're a person of color and you're angry, then either you're violent and dangerous, or you're crazy. So all anger except for the people who are allowed to get angry is given a bad rap. And the assumptions of this narrative is that anger is always destructive, that anger is bad, only certain people in society are allowed to get angry, and that anger equals hatred. Well, again, there are some truths that to this. For example, anger can be very destructive, and some people who are angry are out of control, and there are many people who are angry and who do get violent. However, not all anger is the same. There is no room in this narrative for, say, righteous anger. So you may have an injustice that is done to you, and this happens a lot with women or people of color, or people who don't have privilege in society, and that's another whole video. And they have righteous anger because they have been abused, they have been injustice has been done to them. But when they express their anger, it's immediately, the assumption is that it's hatred. I have, as a feminist, so I am a feminist, a staunch feminist, and one of the most annoying comments about feminism that I have to deal with on a regular basis is feminism equals hatred for men. And earlier I used to go blue in the face, desperately trying to explain to people that this is so far away from the truth. And just because I'm angry about injustices that I see in the patriarchy, or injustices that I see men around me doing, doesn't mean I hate men. I'm angry with them. I don't approve of a lot of privileged, sexist male behavior, but that doesn't mean I hate the whole gender. And I used to go blue in the face trying to explain this. I've stopped explaining it because I've realized that the people who propagate this narrative, some of them are just ignorant, and them I can talk to. And then there's the other bunch who don't want to change their narrative because it suits them to stay in that narrative. It gives them power to stay in the status quo, if you know what I mean. But it's so far away from the truth, and it is used to shame people who are genuinely angry. It is used to suppress and oppress their power, because when you start getting righteously angry is when you really start getting into your power. And if you don't oppress it and you don't suppress it, you will find ways to use that anger to create transformation and to create change. But if you're going to get shamed for it and you get this narrative thrown at you, it can be highly oppressive. And if you buy into the narrative, you will then your anger would eventually come out in destructive ways, and then people get turned around and say, see, we knew it. You're angry and you're dangerous. Okay, now I don't know which number I'm at. I think I'm at number 4. So the other narrative that is a very narcissistic narrative, there's several. Today I'm just covering 5, so there's several, is spiritual narratives. And these narratives have very, very strict definitions of what spirituality is and what is not spiritual and what is spiritual. So the narrative says that if you are a spiritual minded person, or you are uh, uh, maybe some kind of a spiritual leader or representative, you need to act a certain way, you need to look a certain way, whether that means eating certain kinds of food, wearing certain kinds of clothing, you know, or talking a certain way. And if you don't fit that, then you're branded as either fake or unspiritual. I remember I had this very, very sort of blowout, very big blowout with this narcissist again, who was a real NPD. And I remember, like, so I am a healer, and I'm a you know, a traumatologist, but I don't claim to follow any particular lifestyle, and I don't ask my clients to follow a particular lifestyle, because to me spirituality is about following your path and being connected. How connected are you to source, and following the path that is your path and that's your unique path, and about soulfulness, how much of your soulfulness that you can bring into your day-to-day life, not about an image. And so therefore I don't propagate any particular way a person should look or eat or live. But I remember this one guy who claims to be a spiritual guru, and we were having lunch together, and he actually went peering into unbelievably, he went peering into my plate to see exactly what I was eating, and started making some very judgmental comments about what I was eating, because it wasn't the right kind of spiritual diet or some nonsense like that. And I was livid. I clearly told him that I didn't appreciate what he did, and I said, you know, spirituality is not about the image. That's narcissistic spirituality. It's not nothing to do with real spirituality at all. You know, it's what comes from your heart and what comes from your soul, even if it isn't always perfect, because not everything that's going to drop out of your mouth is going to be evolved or perfect, because we're all on the path, and we're all growing, and we all have bits and pieces of us that are more evolved than other bits and pieces of us. But that doesn't mean you're not spiritual, because technically you can't not be spiritual. I mean, in the shamanic understanding of the world, everything is energy, everything has spirit. So how can you not be spiritual um, if you don't follow a certain way of being? The fifth narrative, the fifth and last for this video, is the perfectionism narrative. And it is based on the assumption that if you do something, it must be done 100% perfect. Each time, every time, and everything that you do must be perfect. And if you don't do it perfectly, that you are a bad person, and you're a loser, and you are somehow less of a human being. And I don't have to tell you how damaging that has been for so many people, because while it is admirable to have high standards, and it is admirable to do your best and maybe even seek some modicum of perfection in certain things that you do, it also kills creativity, it kills spontaneity when you are so obsessed with perfectionism that you can't feel your soul anymore. You can't feel your essence. And so many of us, I know so many amazingly talented, beautiful, smart people, men and women, who are running around thinking they're not good enough just because they buy into this narrative about being perfect all the time, and doing the right thing all the time, and saying the right thing all the time, and looking the right way all the time. And wow, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. to have on you. So my idea for making this video was to share that if you have been either victimized by these narratives or have found that these narratives are running around in your head and they are hindering you, then I would strongly suggest looking at these narratives and taking them apart, taking their assumptions apart, and seeing for yourself what parts of them are true and what parts of them really don't resonate with you and maybe are not part of your value system, and you don't have to follow these narratives. And it's not going to be an easy task to shake them off, I can tell you that, because they have a horrible way of sneaking back on just when you think